everyone. I'm Lizette Arias, Communications Lead for US Ignite. Today, I have the honor of speaking with our CTO and co-founder, Dr. Glenn Ricart. We'll be chatting about pathways and a little bit of US Ignite's history. Thanks so much for joining this talk today. I'm really excited to get this chance to sit down with you and talk about the Pathways project. Can you tell us about what the name for this grant was, what the purpose was, who were some of the partners involved, and how large of a project it was, and anything else that just helps frame the discussion?
Yes, as you know, Lizette, Ignite is very much about taking technology and applying it in ways that will help communities across the country, public organizations, private organizations, states, cities, and so forth. And a lot of the research that gets done in this country is academic research that may get published in a paper, and then the author goes off and writes another paper. In fact, in academia, you get measured by how many papers you've written. And that ends up being an important merit factor when you go to figure out whether you're going to get promoted or not within most universities. So the question is, how do we take this knowledge that comes from people doing NSF and other sponsored research and really applying that in ways that can really help our communities? So again, a lot of good ideas out there. How do we get them applied? And the pathway is the pathway between the research and having it had an impact in the community. So that's really where we're going, is how to get that kind of a pathway impact. And I'm really a believer in this because I have done 5 startups myself, even though that I was an academic for almost 15 years. And I've kind of gone back. I'm now adjunct faculty at the University of Utah. But it's really interesting to go and take some of the exciting things that are happening in academia and make them happen for communities across the country. And so pathways for that, that's what's been motivating me on this project.
That's so interesting that you are an academic turned startup entrepreneur, a very unique pathway, I would say. And I'm sure you had a lot to share with the communities and in sharing that experience and also some of the research that you know. Can you just describe a little bit of how US Ignite's work and expertise helped you accomplish this project and program?
Well, certainly, US Ignite is all about taking new technologies and ideas and collaborations and bringing them to bear on the most difficult problems that our cities, states, counties, various parts of our country have to challenge them and to see what we can do. We've been working on this at the US Ignite for almost 2 decades now, and we want to make sure we can bring the best ideas to light. So I was able to go and get a grant from the National Science Foundation to go and take a number of communities, there's about 2 dozen, and to see what we could do to take what they had given them as academic grants and turn them into benefits for communities. And by the way, this is a continuing direction at the National Science Foundation. They're now doing it in other ways, and they're asking specifically for people to support research and propose research that will go and have specific impact in the communities. I'm so glad to see this. And I'm so glad to have been part of the process to go and make that happen. And Ignite was able to go and help back that up and help make that happen in the communities. So about 3 or 4 years ago, let me tell you the history here. David Corman at the National Science Foundation said, "Hey, Glenn, would you and some of your folks come and talk to our grantees? We're going to have a PI meeting. We're going to invite the grantees, and we're going to ask them to come and talk about what they're doing. And I'd like you to talk about the pathways that those projects could have to make real impact in their communities, not just generate papers." Nick Maynard and myself, Lee Davenport and others went to that PI meeting, and we had 45 minutes where we were able to sit down with the projects that were there. They'd been funded by the NSF, and talk about what they could do, what we could do, how these projects could have a very positive impact on their communities. And that was a very successful meeting. In order to go and help structure things, I created a 4-page questionnaire. Page 1 kind of asked them some of the details about what their project was about. page two certain what stage are they in? Are they just beginning? Are they in the middle of the research? Are they continuing the research? Are they almost done? Because the things that you can do to have an impact on the community depend on where your research is, just starting or you're wrapping it up. Then the third page is a variable page that depends on what they asked or answered rather on the first two pages. So for a brand new project, it suggests some ways that you might develop a community to go and support you with that and your ability to support the community. And for things that are already out there, well, what impact are you already having in your test communities? How can you expand those test communities to be real communities, people, in order to have that same kind of impact? And then the fifth page was, so what now? What can you go and do from here? And so we got them to think about those things. We took them back in the Pathways Project, and we then went and contacted each of them with specific actionable suggestions based on what they had told themselves that might be useful ways to go and take this forward. And it was amazing. Once these folks had had 45 minutes to think together with themselves and their teams about what they might do, I was almost unnecessary in some cases because they were now motivated to go do this. And David Corman said, hey, we want this to happen. And they were ready to do that. Now, some people did need some more help and they wanted to know, well, who could we contact? How do you do this approach? And of course, the Pathways Project was to provide them with that kind of consulting. So I would be on Zoom meetings. I would be on Google Meet, talking to different projects that were out there about what they could do. Could they get additional funding to go there and cover their additional expenses? Yes, they could. Explain how to make that happen. Could they go and rewrite some of their academic papers into things that the people who might be leaders in the community could help understand and help employ in their community? It was wonderful. I set aside, actually, on my calendar, there's a button to press that said meeting with Glenn, and people were pressing that button and having meetings with me over Zoom like we're doing right now. And they would say, we're stuck here, here, and here. And I would say, well, have you tried Z, W, and P? Oh, that's a good idea. Let's do that. Maybe involve this other person. Maybe, oh, there's a similar project happening in the state of California. Why don't you contact them and see how they're being effective? So that's the kind of thing that we were doing at the beginning of the Pathways Project. Something that's always tuned to what that project was doing, the state that they were in, and how could they have greater impact. And I think that was widely successful, and it was actually widely quoted in order to start the new TIP Directorate at the National Science Foundation. The TIP Directorate is a cross-functional directorate for being able to go and transition various technologies into practice, innovation, and partnerships. And technology innovation partnerships, the TIP Directorate. And it's cross-cutting. All of the other directorates work with TIP to go and make their work more relevant. And I'm proud as punch that I had some of the earliest work to go and make that happen. They've taken a number of those same ideas that US Ignite did in that first cohort I told you about and apply them more generally to people applying for grants so that they get built into the grants and the process gets, the people have already been recruited. We don't have that problem of organizing it in the middle. It's organized from the beginning, and that's being much more effective. So in some sense, you could say that NSF has adopted some of the US Ignite properties and approaches to things, and that's helping them be successful and helping the communities be successful.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one thing I wanted to clarify is you mentioned community impacts. Can you give some examples of what that actually means?
Certainly. So we had some folks who wanted to go and put together a in their science museum to have the local researchers be able to have talks and even exhibits talking about what they were working on, build civic pride in what they were doing, and get people behind it so that it would be part of the mainstream on what happens. In other cases, they were kind of afraid of what happens if we take this to a city council? What happens if we take this to a commission? And I worked with them because we've done this before at US Ignite. We work with communities. They're not the ugly ogres that the academics might have thought they were. They actually do want to improve their communities. It's why they're there. And it's just rewarding to see these connections get made and the ability to go and work together. Now, I will say it's been more effective in places where there are multiple people working together on both sides of the technology and the governance aisle. And because bringing those communities together with their researchers is so important, the National Science Foundation is now supporting grants to be able to go and have what are called economic engines in these areas, where they're taking some of the research that's being done and some of the community leaders and putting them together from the beginning so that these engines can do miraculous things. And I couldn't be prouder that US Ignite is helping with those engines and helping to make sure that those engines are doing the right things, are being valuable to both parties, and are making a real difference in their communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you think about the impact that the Pathways project had on the communities, was there a thing you were most excited about in thinking how the project was being set up that was truly different than anything you had done before that made you very, I guess, what's the word? Looking forward to the future.
Right. So I think an important part was to go and give people pathways that did not have any failure options.
Mm,
And there actually is no failure option if the community is behind it, your technology is behind it, the National Science Foundation has funded you to make sure that that working relationship is working well. It means even if the thing that you devised was not what you originally proposed to the NSF, but maybe something like it or something inspired by it or even next generational can come out of it. And that next generation result can have even more impact than the originally imagined result.
yeah.
So it's just that kind of people working together that instead of it being in competition, it's being in concert. Of course, one of the concepts that US Ignite has always had, we try to get together our communities into meetings from time to time. For example, our Thursday afternoon meetings that we have and talk about what one community is doing that another community might want to think about adopting. And we've been very lucky to have a number of academics come and join those meetings and just really get in the US Ignite spirit of making technology transition to having significant positive impact in communities across the country.
So, what was one thing that surprised you from talking to all these PIs, or something that you weren't expecting to hear, a problem they might be having or a solution they came up with that you had just not, I mean, you're a very smart person. You probably think of a million things before they are brought to you. Anything that really stood out to you?
Sure. I was surprised at how many people were afraid that they might run afoul of some law or ruling or practice or way things have always been done. And it seems to me that moving the status quo forward is even better thing to do than to try to fit in too well with the existing status quo. You're trying to improve things after all, and the new things are not going to look exactly like the old things, and hopefully they're better things. And if you work on it with all the parties involved, you're very, very likely to have success. So one of the things that happened during the Pathways project is in the last year of the Pathways project, I went and I took all these pathways that we had discovered, all the different kinds of ways that you might approach this, and put them together in sort of a create your own pathway without Glenn having to be involved. And you go to a website and it asks you something about your project and what you hope to have happen from it and so forth. And that begins asking you a few questions. You start branching out into this big chart, which covers all the conditions that I had found while I was working on the project. So, oh, you have one that looks like this, where the city council isn't behind it, but the mayor is. So how can we go and make that come together so that both the mayor and the city council are doing it? And here's a specific suggestion for doing that. And as a result, it's able to help give you ideas. You don't, of course, have to follow them. It's not directing you to do things. But by having those ideas, you can go and never feel like you're stuck. And I thought that was one of the big insights, was that people tend to get themselves into a corner and they tend to feel as though they're stuck. And to just unstick them and allow them to go and move forward, give them permission to go and move forward, was an important part of what the Pathways Chart Your Own Venture was capable of doing. And we really had some very good results from that.
This sounds like a very valuable tool for other community leaders and academics trying to have an impact in community. Is this choose your own adventure experience available somewhere?
Well, so the one on the website is a little dated because it hasn't been updated since the end of my Pathways. But in another sense, it's been updated by the fact that the National Science Foundation is now issuing solicitations that have the pathways built in.
Oh,
So you don't have to go to my work. They're adopting a lot of those ideas in how they're making the new solicitations available.
okay.
And I couldn't be prouder of the fact that these folks are doing that. I had the distinct pleasure of being on a review panel just in the last couple of weeks and reviewing these types of proposals coming into the NSF. And here I am, kind of like the proud papa here. All right, these people got the idea. They've written a good proposal. They don't need me. And, one of the best things in life you can do is to make a difference in a place and be able to step out of the way, and it continues on without you. And I think that we've done that with the Pathways Project, because now the NSF is asking for the same sorts of things that I'd been asking for before. And since the NSF asks, it's very important for them to answer. And the review panels have to take it into account when they're looking at who they're going to recommend for funding. And so I think the TIP Directorate is having really a huge benefit to the NSF that way. And by the way, before the TIP Directorate, the problem was that I was only having impact within one of the directorates. And once the TIP came along and a number of the people who had sponsored my work moved into the TIP Directorate, as my grant was ending, I got moved from a directorate, the Computing Information Sciences and Engineering Directorate, to the TIP. The person had moved to the TIP Directorate and brought me with them, my grant with them, to the TIP Directorate. So I couldn't be prouder of the TIP Directorate at NSF. It's had some great leadership. It's done some wonderful things in terms of making research available to the people who need it most.
And it's truly amazing to see that the work that you did helping communities is being augmented in such a big way nationally and is going to continue in decades later. That's really something to be proud of. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that'll be better for all of us since we're all living here in our communities and we'll get to reap the benefits from that. So thinking about communities and PIs that might be interested in doing community-based work, do you have any general advice for a forming or new innovation network in thinking about some of the work that needs to be done ahead of time, ahead of putting in a proposal or yeah, just at the beginning stage?
Sure. Well, academics by nature are thinking about new things. They can go publish,
Yeah.
because publishing more things gets you more brownie points or whatever they are in academia, references, reference counts, and so forth. And the trick is that when you're doing that, can you also make a positive impact on your community? Can you do both at the same time? Can you think of some things which are not only the next logical thing academically, but also the next logical thing for your community? Now, the overlap is not perfect. There's still a lot of folks who are going to be doing very theoretical things, and they won't be too connected to the community. So, for example, the people who are working on the age of the universe and what kinds of particles exist and how do they work, that work is not going to come and affect a lot of people anytime soon. So I think that the idea is, though, that in addition to that pure research, we need to be looking at the kinds of applied research that is going to make a difference in people's lives. And we've begun to see it now. We've begun to see traffic lights, which operate not on a regular cycle, but on what the traffic needs, and providing ways for emergency vehicles to be able to get to where they need to get to quickly. We've seen maps and routing that are much more efficient than air pollution in some cities has been decreased by routing trucks around the outside of the city rather than having them drive through downtown. That came out of work that we did at US Ignite here in the US Ignite air quality action calls. So there's just a lot of things that can happen when people decide that they want to take on a problem, not the theoretical problem, but the practical issue that's going to have an impact on their communities.
So other than for the good of the community incentive, are there other incentives for thinking in that way?
There are a few, even when academics publish, part of what happens is that other people read those papers and then try to go further with them. So it's the academics do something that the practical people don't do, which is to write down what was working and what wasn't working. Whereas with a lot of civic projects, you have a plan. The plan never gets executed exactly as originally envisioned. You keep modifying your plan, but you don't really share what those events were that caused you to modify the plan, how the plan was modified, how you made it succeed in the end. And academia does know how to do that. So not only do we need academia to feed the latest research on how to platoon vehicles, we also need the practical application in cities and communities to be able to inform research so that the research is based on things that will actually be useful in the real world because they're based on information and activity that we have. That's one of the things about air quality that is so important to me is that air quality is really working in both directions. We have some folks who are measuring air quality, talking about air quality from the academic side. How do we make new changes and ventures, but also from the civic side? How do we reroute the vehicles around the areas of heavy pollution and how much difference can that make? And when the two sides work together, that's the kind of magic that US Ignite and others are making happen by joining the theory and the practice in practical ways that benefit everybody.
Yeah. Well, I think it's been really great talking about all these ideas and highlighting the Pathways Project. Is there any parting thought you have for those listening and or reading?
US Ignite's website is a treasure trove of very interesting ideas. I highly recommend Fostering Civic Trust, the document that's up on the website. One of the things that anybody who's making positive change in their community needs to do is to foster civic trust for this change. There are some people who don't want anything to change, and you have to know how to approach them and how to be able to reassure them that you are doing this change in a way that's going to benefit them and that they will appreciate. And we've got 92 pages of fostering civic trust, how you can do that in your community. I highly encourage you to read it. I encourage you to practice what's in there. And I encourage you to get back and tell others through US Ignite and our meetings and ideas, share that broadly, because it's one of the most important documents that we have to help your projects be successful.
Absolutely. And I will include a link to that in our blog post. Thank you so much, Glenn, for speaking with me today and for doing all this work and sharing about it. I think it's very important and it's going to really create big impacts across the US. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Arns.
Thank you.